Thanks very much for everyone for coming along tonight. Can I start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. We, of course, pay our respects to their elders, past and present. And I also just want to take a moment, because we haven't done it yet, just to give a big round of applause to the organisers of tonight, to Ben and everyone else who organises our Green Drinks. And the reason I want to do that is because tonight I'm so pleased to be amongst so many friends. We are all part of a movement of people who are doing what we can to make sure that our country and our world makes the transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a clean energy-based economy. And how exciting is it to be a part of that movement of change. I previously, as was mentioned, was the National Director of GetUp. And one of the campaigns that was most memorable for me that we ran, in combination with a whole range of other NGOs and activist groups, was around the Gunns pulp mill. You might remember this pulp mill down in Bell Bay in the Tamar Valley in Tasmania. This movement of people against this pulp mill began by mobilising their supporters. They began by telling government that on review after review that this was not a pulp mill that made sense, that there was too many ecological impacts for this to add up. But again, time after time after time, the regulatory, the legislative, the parliamentary paths were closed to them. Very much like the moment we find ourselves in when it comes to action on climate change. And so over time, they lobbied politicians, they lobbied Malcolm Turnbull, they managed to get some progress, but very quickly that progress was turned around. So what did they do? What did they do when those legislative pathways were exhausted? Well, they turned to corporate campaigning. They turned to using their money. And so they started, first of all, identifying who was it that was going to be that could finance this pulp mill. And ANZ, their banker, the Gunns banker, came up. And so all of a sudden, activists started writing letters to ANZ as shareholders, as customers, as potential customers. Those letters started to get responded to. They went on social media, they made complaints to the company, they started getting a response. Then a new CEO, Mike Smith, joined the bank, and all of a sudden there was a lot of pressure on him. But then a critical step was taken. Consumers all of a sudden started walking into branches, started closing their accounts, started moving their money out of ANZ. ANZ made a decision, the new CEO, as a result of all of this consumer pressure and real people actually switching, to no longer consider financing the Gunns pulp mill. And that was a massive victory, because what happened next is that the other major banks in Australia followed, and then global banks followed as well. Everywhere they went, activists went along as well with ads in papers, with good quality company engagement to say, hey, if Australian banks won't fund this project, why should you? And I later since then I've met with two former senior executives at ANZ, and I've asked them, what was it that led to success in that campaign? Because that was such a critical moment. And the answer I got was very enlightening. It was that when customers started switching, the bank staff who heard about it, they didn't just switch in silence, they switched in the branch, they went there, they closed their account, they sent a letter saying, I'm out of here. That all of a sudden the staff started becoming very worried about what was happening. There was unrest within the company, and of course, that's not something that a new CEO wanted to see. And that story shows us the power of how an individual person in cahoots with a whole lot of other people switching at the same time can make a massive impact. Obviously, right now, we also find ourselves in Australia in a moment lacking legislative action, lacking the parliamentary will to take action on climate change. It's very fitting that we're having this conversation on the 1st of July. What a sad day this is for our country, with the new Senate sitting starting today, a Senate that will reverse Australia's carbon price. But as has been said earlier, we also now have an opportunity. It's up to all of us now to ensure that Australia continues to take action on climate change. The superannuation industry, as Michael mentioned, is a $1.8 trillion savings pool in this country. And research shows that about 25% of the Australian public would love to move their money to a fund that was fossil fuel free, to a fund that wasn't with coal and coal seam gas. How good is that? That 25% of the Australian public, including so many of us, are prepared to make the switch. And then when you think about the revenue that would have been earned each year had we been able to keep this carbon price, it's a lot less than that $240 billion that is there to be moved. We can make a massive shift in financial markets if we start divesting from fossil fuels. And that's why I've been working with a team of people, some folks who are out of JP Morgan, one of the founders of the responsible investment sector in Australia, someone out of Australia, a couple of people out of Australian Ethical, and a whole range of others, with investment managers with over 40 years of experience, to bring together a team of people who over the last year have been working day and night to build what will be Australia's first fossil fuel-free superannuation fund in the form of Future Super, to be launched very, very soon. Future Super follows in a long line of funds, not superannuation funds, but managed funds, endowment funds, banks, who have been divesting from fossil fuels. In fact, in the US and Europe, there are many more options than there are here in Australia for people, for individuals, as well as for institutions who want to divest from fossil fuels. But people are doing so not just because of the power, not just because of what we can all do when we work together. Let's take a minute to think about the fact that sitting in this room now, doing the rough maths, there's about $5 million worth of superannuation savings right here tonight. It's extraordinary the scale of what can be achieved in superannuation. But, as has been mentioned as well, tonight's topic, Unburnable Carbon, reminds us of the fact that this is also about protecting our retirement savings. There's an emerging consensus that fossil fuels add more risk to a portfolio than the relevant reward that we get as investors. We're talking about people like the World Bank and the President of the World Bank, the head of the IMF, the head of the OECD, Citibank, Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Oxford University. All of these institutions have studied the risks associated with fossil fuels and have come to the conclusion that we may be facing a significant carbon bubble coming down the line, a moment where there's a significant repricing event as a result of so many stranded assets emerging. The fossil fuel sector is hoping to dig out of the ground 3 to 5 times what the scientists tell us is possible to dig out of the ground while staying under 2 degrees. Now that alone tells us that we don't want to be part. We don't want our superannuation, we don't want our banking to be part of that movement. But there are also significant risks involved to us in our own retirement savings. Dr. John Hewson talks about the fact that the carbon bubble, these repricing events that will occur over the next few years, may be bigger than the global financial crisis. And when you study the economics, it's easy to see why. Chinese demand for Australian coal, so critical to the valuations of our resources sector, expected to peak in demand between 2016 and 2020. A massive shift to renewable energy going on in China, as well as the emergence of local coal that makes Australian companies less valuable. The mining industry responds to this fact by saying India is emerging. India will be the great champion to build up Australian coal and maintain valuations. And yet, in the last 3 years, the price of solar has gone down 65% in India. A massive reduction in the price of solar. Modi, the new Prime Minister, has committed to bring solar to every house in India so that every house can power their lights via solar energy. There are massive transitions going on across our economy, both here in Australia and in the world. And that's why we've put together Future Super as an option to give the Australian public a choice to finally get out of fossil fuels. There are other funds out there that try to not be so much in coal, that underweight themselves, that are responsible in some way by making the transition. But this will be the first time in Australia that there's a truly fossil fuel-free fund. But it's also a fund that looks at broader ESG issues, the kind of issues that Michael raised as well. Issues around old growth logging or tobacco or gambling are removed from our investable universe. And so we find ourselves with a fund that's soon to be launched that will both be not just fossil fuel free, but a broadly and deeply ethical fund as well. A few of us around tonight, we'd love to talk to you more about Future Super, to give you a sense of when we'll launch and answer many other questions. If you want to find out, if you want to be amongst the first to find out about Future Super when we do launch, and it is very close, then there are some folks around who've got some tablets, not some iPad type things. Well, how else do you find tablets these days? It's a strange thing to call it. If you throw your details down there, we'll be sure to stay in touch. But thank you very much for doing what it is you're doing in your everyday work life, in your activism to be part of this transition. And I hope that we can soon welcome you to Future Super. Thank you.